Yeah, well, hello. With me today is Dr. Gad Saad, a Canadian professor and evolutionary psychologist who has written best-selling books including The Consuming Instinct and The Parasitic Mind. Dr. Saad will be coming to Iceland soon, where he's going to be speaking in front of a live audience at Silverberg in Harpa, and tickets for that event are already on sale, so be sure not to miss that if you are located here in Iceland. Dr. Saad, who holds a PhD from Cornell University, has devoted his distinguished career to exploring evolutionary explanations for human behavior, including consumer behavior. He is now serving as a visiting professor and global ambassador at Northwood University in Midland, Michigan, while on leave from his position at Concordia University in Montreal, Canada. In his research, Dr. Saad delves deeply into the biological underpinnings of human actions and social trends. In his book, The Parasitic Mind, and numerous peer-reviewed articles, he analyzes complex topics with remarkable clarity, offering well-argued, evidence-based perspectives. With a unique ability to simplify complex concepts and present accessible ideas, Dr. Saad has become a compelling voice whose influence extends far beyond the classroom. His podcast and YouTube show, The Saad Truth, has attracted a wide and diverse audience drawn to his honesty and intellectual depth, shedding a new light on many of today's most pressing issues. Dr. Saad continues to emerge as a powerful force both in academia and in the public sphere, and that is why I am thrilled to have him on my show. Very warm welcome to you, Dr. Gad Saad.
Thank you for that incredibly generous introduction. I'm so happy to be with you. Thank you.
And I hope you can excuse my thick Icelandic accent here, but the first thing we always ask upcoming guests of Iceland or guests of Iceland is, what do you know about Iceland? What have you heard about Iceland, if anything?
Uh, Frankly, truly only good things. I recently was at a local cafe. I was speaking to an artist who was putting up his art in this cafe, Italian cafe. And when I told him that I was soon going to Iceland, he spent the next 30 minutes telling me that it was going to be a life-changing experience, that he's been back 4 times to Iceland. He even had, I can't remember if it was the president of Iceland or the prime minister of Iceland who just showed up to one of his art things in Reykjavik, and everybody was down to earth and lovely. And so anything that I've heard has been nothing but great. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Okay, that's good to hear. I hope we will succeed your expectations. But I would like to ask, I would like to start off with a question about, because there has been an intense public debate about wokeism here in Iceland over the past few days, actually. As a nationally known activist from the far left of the political spectrum here in Iceland that recently declared that woke was a terrible ideology and it caused a major stir. Everything just went apeshit here. And since then, those aligned with the woke movement have been working hard to defend it, offering explanations like being woke just means being kind to others, being aware of social injustices faced by minority groups, and that those who oppose it are simply bad people. Now, you have written and spoken extensively on this topic, and to begin with, I would like to ask you to explain to our listeners what your personal take on the woke ideology is. How would you best describe it, and what do you see as its main flaws?
Right. What wonderful opening question. Thank you for that. So, look, as you mentioned in the introduction, a minute or two ago, my area of scientific research is in applying evolutionary psychology and evolutionary biology to study human behavior in general and consumer and economic behavior in particular. Very early in my career, now this is going back to 31 years ago when I finished my PhD in 1994, very quickly I noticed that many of my colleagues in the social sciences and the business school thought that it was very dangerous and very corrosive to argue that human beings are shaped by biological forces.
Mm-hmm.
To them, biology mattered for every single species on Earth except one called human beings. And if it applied to human beings, it applied for all of our traits except the ones that are above the neck. So the main organ that defines your personhood, which is called your brain,
Hmm.
somehow it was viewed as very, very distasteful to argue that the human mind could be shaped by the same evolutionary forces that shape the behavior of every other species. So that was my first introduction to what I subsequently called parasitic thinking, because here were supposedly very intelligent people who could completely look at you and negate reality that the average 2-day old pigeon would know that it's true, right? I
Hmm.
mean, surely you don't think that human behavior exists outside of our biology. Somehow we exist in a world where biology ceases to matter.
Hmm.
And so over the next nearly 30 plus years, when I first started writing The Parasitic Mind, I realized that perfectly intelligent human beings could be zombified by ideological capture. And so let me explain very quickly why I use the neuroparasitological framework, and then I'll link it back to your question about, your woke, is woke good or bad?
Hmm.
Parasitology is the field of host parasite interactions, but parasites can end up in many different places in your body. So if you have a tapeworm, it parasitizes your intestinal tract, but a neuroparasite is one that ends up in the host's brain, altering the host's circuitry to suit the interest of the parasite. So for example, a wood cricket detests water. It wants to do nothing with water. But when it is parasitized by a hairworm, the hairworm needs the wood cricket to jump in water in order for it to complete its reproductive cycle. So that same wood cricket that hates water suddenly jumps and commits suicide in the interest of the parasite that has zombified its brain. And that was my eureka moment. That's when I said, aha, I will now use this neuroparasitological framework to argue that human beings could not only be parasitized by actual physical brain worms, but they could be parasitized by ideological brain worms.
Hmm.
What are these ideological parasites? Postmodernism, cultural relativism, social constructivism, identity politics, and many others. Now, each of these ideas, so now I'm going to come to your question, is wokeness good or bad? Each of these ideas starts off with a noble, positive goal,
Hmm.
exactly to your point. But then, in the service of that goal, if we have to murder and rape truth, so be it, because the social justice goal is more important than the defense of truth. So, let me give you a concrete example. Equity feminism is a great idea. Equity feminism says men and women should be treated equally under the law. There should be no institutional barriers that cause one sex to be less likely to succeed in anything than the other sex. Well, based on that definition of feminism, most of us, and probably all your viewers and listeners, would say, yeah, sign me up. I'm an equity feminist. But then radical feminists came along and said, well, that's not enough. In order for us to accelerate the battle against the mean patriarchy, let us now promulgate the idea that there are no innate sex differences between men and women, and any sex differences between men and women must be due to social construction. And if we promulgate this idea, it will allow us to more quickly reach our goal of gender equality in society. Well, you see what the problem is. In the service of what started off as a nice goal, we end up negating reality and raping and murdering truth. So I can chew gum and walk at the same time. I could be for social justice without murdering truth. Unfortunately, wokeism doesn't do that. Wokeism says up is down. Some women have 9-inch penises. Left is right. Slavery is freedom. No, I will not agree to that. That doesn't make me mean. It makes me a solid defender of the truth.
Hmm. But still, wokeism, this ideology, which you describe as totally unsustainable for the species Homo sapiens, human beings. It has had a stronghold, or has been I would say it has been the leading ideology in Western societies for the past 10 years, or roughly about so. Would you agree with that, or how would you describe the status of the woke ideology?
So it might be that the last 10 years is when people started seeing it on their radar on their way to pick up the eggs for tonight's omelet. But I've been standing on top of the mountain for nearly 30 years screaming for somebody to pay attention, right? The reality is it takes a while for these things to spread, right? When I first started, attacking all of this parasitic nonsense, uh, people would say, "Oh, come on, Dr. Saad, this is just some silly idea that is in some silly department in the humanities." And then I would answer them, "But guess what? Those ideas eventually will break out of the lab, like right, just like the Wuhan COVID virus came out of the lab
Yeah.
and then us locked down for 3 years." The bad ideas might start off in some esoteric philosophy department or women's studies department, but then it becomes our prime ministers and our leaders in industry and our Hollywood stars and our prime ministers in Canada. And so yes, you're right that people have taken notice over the past 10 years, but the origins of those parasitic ideas, we can date them back to 50 to 100 years ago, depending on which parasitic idea you're talking about. For example, cultural relativism, which basically purports that there are no universal moral truths. Who are you to judge the cultural values and practices of another culture, you disgusting racist? That started close to 100 years ago by a professor of anthropology at Columbia named Franz Boas, and then he trained his doctoral students in this nonsense. On the other hand, postmodernism really picked up about 40, 50 years ago with a bunch of French postmodernists, Jacques Derrida, Michel Foucault, Jacques Lacan. So it depends, but you're right that people woke up to it probably in the past decade.
And like what I was trying to say is, I feel that this has been the ruling idea in our institutions and in big corporations and everywhere in our society in the past 10 years, 10, 15 years. So would you agree with that, that this has been the ruling, this basically flawed ideology has been a ruling ideology in our Western Hemisphere for the recent 10 years?
I mean, absolutely, right? I mean, just think about every leader of Western countries, whether it be the New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, or it be Angela Merkel, or it be, anybody who was in France, or it be the Canadian Prime Minister who recently stepped down, Justin Trudeau, and on and on and on. All of them share one thing in common, which is they were all fully zombified by these parasitic ideas. Now, let me give you an example, which I think will resonate with people from Iceland. Iceland is a small country that has, would it be right for me to say it's about 300,000 people? Is that right?
Yeah, it's about 320,000 Icelandic people and then some 80,000 foreigners. So it's 400,000 all in all.
So let's suppose now that you let in 150,000 people from Yemen, Pakistan, and Syria. Do you think that the indigenous culture of Iceland might change, or do you think it would only be enriched? I'm genuinely asking you.
I genuinely think it would change, and since Icelandic born people are not having babies anymore, we would probably very soon be overrun by the new population.
Exactly. Now, you stating that doesn't make you a mean racist. It makes you a person who is wedded to reality, right? But the same people who tell you that yesterday John, who was a 6'4", 285-pound NFL football player, woke up the next day and became Linda, and suddenly, automatically, magically, through the magic wand of transgenderism, became a woman. It is now very transphobic of you to say that Linda, that has a 9-inch penis and testicles and was called John yesterday, it is transphobic of you to say that you don't feel comfortable with Linda taking a shower with your 13-year-old daughter. That's just bigoted and mean,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Well, the same people who believe that also think that it is racist and bigoted what you said when you said that Iceland's culture would forever change if you let in people from Yemen. Now, that's not because you are bigoted against people from Yemen. It's because we live in a real world where cultures have many different values.
Exactly.
Some values we share with others, other values we don't share with others. So we know that if Iceland were to let in 100,000 indigenous Danes into Iceland, they're likely to more assimilate than people who come from Yemen. It doesn't take a fancy professor and evolutionary psychologist to explain that to someone, but yet when you are parasitized by cultural relativism, when you are parasitized by suicidal empathy, which is the topic of my next book, that becomes a meanful thing to say. Why are you being mean to noble people from Yemen or Pakistan or Algeria, right? But I come from the Middle East. I understand the culture from the Middle East. There are millions and millions of perfectly beautiful and peaceful people in the Middle East, but they also come with a baggage of values that couldn't be any more contrary to Icelandic values. So you have one of two choices you could make. You could either write articles about the mean Professor Gad Saad coming to Iceland, or maybe open your brains up a bit and actually take time to listen to what I'm warning you about, because it would take exactly 5 minutes for Iceland to no longer be Iceland.
Yeah, like you said, you've been watching this for over 30 years, and but the masses of the people are maybe starting to recognize this now, which I think is mainly because of immigration policies in Europe and also in the States, where the border was just like border control was just shut down, and these immigration policies in Europe that have totally just they have been bankrupting the European communities and the cultures and also, as you mentioned, the transgender thing, when we see that women have to compete in sports with biological men who identify as women. That's I would say that those two factors have been very eye-opening for people to see there's something strange going on here. Would you agree? Why would you? If you could pinpoint what it is that is making this what they would call the backlash of the woke ideology now, where that is coming from?
Well, here's the regrettable part of the architecture of the human mind, and that is that it is a lot more comforting for people to ignore realities until the point that it comes and bites them in the ass, right?
Yeah.
So diabetes doesn't exist until my child has diabetes, right?
Right.
So for example, there are many Jewish billionaires in the United States and Canada that were completely oblivious, and I know many of them, and they're fans of mine and so on, but they were completely oblivious about these issues until their son or daughter was affected by huge Jew hatred at their alma mater. Suddenly, the slap of reality woke them up, right? That's the regrettable feature of the human spirit, which is it's a lot easier for people to just ignore reality and say, it's happening over there. It doesn't really affect me. Plus, it's too scary for me to think about it. So let me try to ignore it as long as I can ignore it until finally it hits me. So you're right. It could have been the transgender issues that slapped people into reality. It could be immigration. It could be many other things. But people are waking up. But here's the problem. Why are you waking up now when you could have woken up 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and avoided unbelievable amount of costs that we will have to bear. Not ju- we will it will be economic costs, it is social fabric costs, it is labor costs, it is cultural costs, it will be violence costs, because I can assure you that people will wake up at some point violently.
Mhm.
I've been begging people to wake up so that we can resolve the problem peacefully.
Mm.
But the problem is going to be resolved one day or another. Do you prefer it to happen peacefully or violently? The reality is, with every passing day, Europe is coming to much closer to violence than to peaceful solutions.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think like I was mentioning before, this conversation we're having in Iceland right now stems from this leftist politician who was criticizing the woke ideology, and it's because they're saying now the woke ideology has been hurting us. It's been hurting the left. We need to snap out of this because we are losing elections now. And that's what's waking them up. And I believe that Democrats in the United States are going to have to wake up to that smell of the same coffee very soon, and they're probably started to do that. So it's
Sorry,
yeah.
forgive me for interrupting you.
Mm.
I hate the fact that they are waking up to it for pragmatic
Yeah,
reasons.
yeah.
If we don't wake up, it's because we will lose elections, rather than waking up because it is morally wrong and grotesque for you to argue that 6'4" men should be sharing the locker room with your 13-year-old daughter.
Mhm.
That should have woken you up rather than the loss of elections.
Exactly, I agree. But do you? I mean, you write in the parasitic mind. You talk about a vaccine against the parasite. Are you optimistic that we will ever uh, become free of this nuisance that the woke ideology is?
Yeah, well, great. That's a great question. Thank you. So let me answer it in two ways.
Hmm.
The capacity for the human mind to be parasitized is eternal. In other words, this is not a unique feature that is happening today. What is unique to today is the specific parasitic ideas that are zombifying us, right?
Mm.
But 300 years ago, in a place called Salem, Massachusetts, where we had the Salem witch hunts, it was perfectly natural, if you thought that Linda, your neighbor, was a witch,
Mm.
to throw her into the water. And if she swam, that proved that she was a witch. And if she drowned, oh, I guess we were wrong. She's not a witch. So, so the capacity for the human mind to succumb to imbecilic zombification is eternal.
Hmm.
What is to the current time is the specific cocktail of these parasitic ideas. As I said, postmodernism, by the way, is the granddaddy of all parasitic ideas, because it removes the possibility of there being an objective truth, right? Postmodernism purports there
Uh,
are no objective truths other than the one objective truth that there are no objective truths. So you could imagine how that becomes complete intellectual terrorism. Up is down, left is right, women are men, because there are no objective truths.
uh,
Who are you to say what is the objective truth, right? So I think that there is a way to create a mind vaccine to defeat the current parasitic ideas. But as we know from actual biological pathogens, they mutate, right? So once I create a vaccine to fight this particular flu strain,
mm.
then the next one comes out next year and the vaccine is no longer. So we have to be forever vigilant against bad ideas.
Yeah.
And that's why I've dedicated my life to psychology of decision making, because the most dangerous thing in nature
Mhm.
is what's inside this brain, right? I mean, yes, tsunamis can cause great damage, but nothing can bring about the end of civilization as much as parasitic ideas. And so that's why I wake up every day saying, what can I do to hopefully defend the truth?
Yeah. And what advice could you what advice do you give your readers, and can you give our listeners? How can we defend reason and intellectual freedom
Yes.
in these current times?
So in chapter 8 of the parasitic mind, I implore people to activate their inner honey badger. And I suspect that maybe some people from Iceland may not understand the reference. So if I could take a minute to explain it. The honey badger, the African honey badger, has been ranked as the absolute most ferocious animal in nature. Now, that's saying a lot, right? Because
Hmm.
there are a lot of very ferocious animals. And for you to be number one, World Cup winner of ferocity in the animal kingdom, that's saying a lot. Now,
Hmm.
why is it so fierce? It's only the size of a small dog, small to medium-sized dog, but yet a pride of adult lions, if they come across it, will say, "Excuse me, sir, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Please let us move aside so that you can pass." Why? Because it walks very tall,
Mm.
because it defends itself till death, right? Now, when I ask people to activate their inner honey badger, I'm not imploring you to be physically violent, but I'm imploring you to be ferocious in defending foundational principles of the Western tradition, right?
Hmm.
Guys like me who escaped the Middle East came to the West, and we appreciate what's in the West because we've sampled from the buffet of possible societies. And we know that it's not the default value throughout history to have the freedoms and liberties that we have in the West. And therefore, that's why I fight. Well, partly because it's my personality, but also because I know what's awaiting around the corner. Westerners and people who go to the Blue Lagoon in Iceland think that this is the default value. It's all kumbaya. We all love each other. We all listen to the Beatles music and we'll all get along. That's not what history teaches us.
Hmm.
So when I implore people to be honey badgers, you could do it in many ways. If you go to the pub with your friends and your friend says something that is insanely ridiculous, challenge them politely. Don't keep quiet because you don't want to create friction. If your professor says that men can menstruate, raise your hand politely and say, "What are you talking about, professor? What do you mean by men can menstruate?
Hmm.
What kind of insanity is this?" So, in other words, don't diffuse the responsibility of defending reality, common sense, science, logic, reason to
Hmm.
others. Don't always say, "Don't worry, Gad Saad will defend us. He's courageous on our behalf."
Hmm.
Each of us has a voice. Each of us has to be a honey badger.
Hmm. Yeah, but people, they're internally afraid of offending, trans people, for example. I mean, it's almost only if you say that it's strange that women have to compete in competitive sports with trans women, which are biological men. You are attacking trans people as a whole, and you're transphobic, and you're an evil person.
But
How do you respond to ideas like this?
so that's, I mean, I discussed this in the parasitic mind, but I actually complete that story, which addresses your question, in Suicidal Empathy, the book that actually I was working on just before I came to meet you.
Mm.
So let me explain the background of the follow-up to the parasitic mind, and then it will hopefully answer your question.
Hmm.
The parasitic mind talked about what happens to our cognitive system once it is parasitized. So cognitive means thought, right?
Yeah.
But we are both a thinking and feeling animal, right? We're not one or the other. So therefore, for me to completely zombify you, I also need to parasitize your emotional system, hence suicidal empathy.
Hmm.
So now I'm going to address your question. What happens with suicidal empathy is it takes a noble emotion called empathy. It makes perfect sense for a social animal like human beings to be empathetic.
Hmm.
It actually oils our sociality. But like Aristotle explained to us 2,500 years ago, everything in the right amount, in the right place, in the right measure, right? So therefore, if empathy starts misfiring, if it becomes hyperactive, if it targets the wrong targets, then it becomes suicidal empathy. So when you're talking about the trans issue,
Hmm.
for every case where you're trying to be empathetic to the biological male who wishes to wrestle with biological females, and therefore you want to be empathetic to her,
Hmm.
what about the empathy for all of the biological women who are not going to be on the podium because he's going to steal that opportunity from them. We know that there was a recent study done by the UN of none other than the UN is not exactly conservative organization. They found that there were roughly 900 medals that were lost in the study that they did, but that were taken by biological men who are trans women against biological women. Aren't half of humanity called women deserving of your empathy? Well, when you suffer from suicidal empathy, that no longer matters. So, for example, MS-13 gang members from El Salvador are worthy of greater empathy than our American vets who are homeless on the streets. That can't be right. That's called suicidal empathy. Arguing that all immigrants are equal is suicidal empathy. Nobody is saying that you shouldn't be empathetic to people fleeing war. I am a product of being a war refugee, right? Right? So people tell me, but your friend Elon Musk is also an immigrant. Why do you rail against immigration? I'm not railing against immigration. I'm railing against open borders. I'm railing against no vetting of immigrants. I'm railing against letting in millions of people into your society that you could never integrate properly. So, look, Fido, the house cat, is called a feline. Yes, feline. It's a feline species. The African male lion in the savannah is also called a feline. They're both called a feline, but surely we have the ability to recognize that while I can cuddle in bed with Fido, the house cat feline, if I try to cuddle in bed with the African male lion in the savannah, it might end up badly for me, even though they're both called felines. So, what level of stupidity must you be succumbing to say all immigrants are equal? They're not equal, right? Some don't come from cultures that like homosexuals. So, if you are liberal, as many of the wokesters are, do you want to let in millions of people who in their home country kill homosexuals? How do you reconcile that? Well, you reconcile it by being suicidally empathetic.
But one last thing about the trans thing. I mean, I often see that when someone is criticizing this thing with the trans women in women's sports, is they always get this that they are denying the existence of trans people. They want to erase trans people, and they don't acknowledge trans people for what they are. You probably heard this. I mean, well, how do you answer notions like that?
Not only have I heard it, I appeared in front of the Canadian Senate in 2017 as an expert witness. Because in the 21st century, you need an evolutionary behavioral scientist to appear in front of the Canadian Senate and confirm that for a sexually reproducing species made up of two phenotypes, male and female, there really is a way to define what is male or female. When I said that, one of the senators, a Canadian senator, said, to your point, to your question, he said, you are promoting the genocide of transgender people.
Yeah, exactly.
To which I answered, you might want to be careful about accusing someone who literally escaped a genocide in Lebanon of this genocide stuff. I would be careful about saying such things. And of course, it didn't go too well for her. So I understand that reflex, but that's why I implore you to be honey badgers. Look, I wish for every person in society to live free of bigotry. I don't care if you want to call yourself Linda and wear heels and wear, a dress. That's great. More power to you. And you shouldn't be discriminated against. That doesn't mean in the pursuit of that, I have to go down the road of uniquely celebrating your personhood whilst sublimating the rights of my daughter, right? My daughter also has rights, right? And those rights are that she should be allowed to play soccer against other individuals who share her biological sex. Life is about modulating these trade-offs of conflicts, right? Some men, if they feel sexually starved, feel that it is their right to attack women sexually. But it turns out that you don't have that right, because the right of women to be free of your sexual aggression supersedes your sexual frustration rights. Yes? So, by the exact same logic, more power to all transgender people. That doesn't mean that you destroy the dreams of actual biological women so that we could all stand and sing along to your unique, beautiful personhood.
Exactly. Now, Donald Trump, the president of the United States, he has, since he took office in January, made some steps against the woke mind virus, and he has, for example, banned biological men in women's sports with a presidential order. Do you think that Donald Trump will have an influence on suppressing the woke mind virus, or is it gonna make the woke ideology even stronger to have an opponent like him? Or what do you think is the effect of Donald Trump coming into office of the United States in these times?
So, in the short term, him having won is certainly good news for all those fighting these parasitic ideas, because of course the alternative would have been a acceleration and doubling down on all of this woke nonsense.
Yeah.
So in that short-term window, of course, you can rejoice at his victory. But, so this is the really important but, do not be complacent into thinking that because Donald Trump won his second term, this is going to result in the magic erasure of all parasitic ideas. It took, as I mentioned earlier, 50 to 100 years for all of these parasitic ideas to first be spawned on university campuses and then to escape into every nook and cranny of society. It won't be Donald Trump who comes along and gives us the final vaccine and we'll never hear about these parasitic ideas. So no, I tell people this is going to be a generational battle. Now, I'd like to think that it won't take 50 to 100 years to eradicate all this nonsense, but it certainly won't end because Donald Trump came to power.
And I mean, you would have thought that this must, if it's going to end any time, it's going to have to end in the universities, in the academia, because it's started. It stems from the academia. And do you think that we will ever see our Western universities start to go unwoke or against the woke mind virus? What do you think?
Yeah, again, it's going to be a nuanced answer. On the one hand, I think that the specific parasitic ideas that we're speaking about will wane. They will lose effectiveness. But never underestimate the ability of intellectuals and professors to come up with some of the dumbest ideas, right?
Yeah.
So all of these ideas were started in academia. Now, you might say, well, why am I saying this? I've dedicated my entire life to academia. I've been a professor for 31 years. Well, I'm going to tell you why professors come up with the dumbest ideas. Because regrettably, many of the professors who pontificate these things are perfectly decoupled from the autocorrective pressures of reality, right? So, for example, if you are an engineer that is tasked with building a bridge or an architect, you can't use postmodernist physics because there is this thing called the bridge will collapse, because there is no postmodernist physics. There is just physics.
Yes,
there is no indigenous physics. There is just physics. But when I'm a professor of intersectional lesbian dance therapy, I could stand up in front of a bunch of idiotic students, pontificate about stuff that has no real value, and all of those students will go, yes, yes, beautiful, professor, thank you, because I am perfectly decoupled from reality. That's why, by the way, the two places where you saw the least parasitic ideas were not that they're not there, but the lesser is the engineering school and the business school. Why? Because you can't build economic models where people's money is going to be affected by doing postmodernist or feminist economics, right? There's just economics. Same thing with engineering. But in the other disciplines, in women's studies and anthropology and sociology and so on, I could afford the luxury of spouting nonsense. So I do think that these specific parasitic ideas will wane, but then professors will be hard at work in coming up with the next generation of idiocy.
Yeah, I see. Okay, but how has this stance of yours against the woke mind virus, if you say, how has that affected your career? I have interviewed Jordan Peterson a couple of times, and he told me personally that, I mean, they didn't cancel him, but they took away his academic career because he had no means to properly work as a professor and have PhD students under him and so on and so on, because just because of his stance against this woke ideology, he was just side-railed kind of. And you have in endless of examples like Brett Weinstein and others that have had to just make a run for it out of their academic career. So how have you managed to survive in this atmosphere?
Well, I have had to bear huge amounts of personal and professional costs. So, for example, personal costs, I know that I'm not always necessarily safe. I get a lot of death threats. I get a lot of hate thrown at me. If I didn't have a thick skin, I might have jumped off a building, because the types of stuff that people write about you and put about you, they post things about, I mean, complete lies, complete fabrications. But my desperate defense of the truth supersedes what some idiot might write about me, right? And so there are huge personal costs. You don't get invited to some of the academic parties that you might otherwise get accepted. You don't get necessarily certain offers that you otherwise would have gotten. So I'll give you a very concrete example. I held the highest professorship at my university. It's a university-wide chaired professorship for 10 years. When it came to renew it, I was always denied after that. This was the last time I held it was in 2018. So it's now been 7 years, and I suspect that I will never hold it again, because I was at that point simply too outspoken against all of the things that my university was defending, indigenous knowledge and transgender and gender pronouns and the rest of it. And I was very, very dead set against it. And so here's another example. I have stopped applying for research grants, because the research grants, which we need to be able to do research, right? I have to pay my students and so on. I I can't apply for a research grant because it requires you to write a diversity, inclusion, and equity statement.
That's right.
Well, guess what? I'm not willing to write a book called The Parasitic Mind, where I say what a cancer this diversity, inclusion, equity is. But then when nobody is looking to fill in the statement, right, I would be a fraudulent guy. I would be an inauthentic guy. So I have stopped applying for research funds, which means that my research has stopped. So they haven't fired me because luckily I do have tenure. I do have a very big platform, so it would be difficult to get rid of me. But for example, as you kindly pointed out in my introduction, when you said I'm currently at Northwood University, the reason why I'm at Northwood University is because it has become very, very dangerous for me to be an outspoken Jewish professor at my university. There
yeah.
are literal,
Wow.
genuine physical threats against me. So, you know, all of the people that you could think of that have probably bore a cost as professors, and I don't mean to be engaging in a competition of victimology, it probably pales in comparison to what I've had to bear, because I'm probably the most outspoken professor by many orders of magnitude. But guess what? At the end of the night, when I put my head on the pillow, I could sleep well because I know that I never modulated my speech in order to pursue selfish careerist interest, which goes back to our original question, which is, what is my advice to people? Be a honey badger. Look, when the young men landed at Normandy at the end of World War II, most of them knew that they were going to be mowed down like little mosquitoes by the German machine guns. And yet they all said, yeah, yeah, okay, I'll go. So there is no justification for why you shouldn't speak. There is always some excuse you can give me for why it shouldn't be you, right? So let me give you an example. Well, Professor Saad, I can't speak because I'm not tenured yet. Okay, now you get tenure. Well, Professor Saad, I can't speak because I'm going up for full professor. Okay, now you get full professor. Well, Professor Saad, I can't speak because I'm applying for a chaired professorship. Well, now you get chaired professorship. Well, Professor Saad, I can't speak because they won't give me the grant. So there is always a reason why it shouldn't be you who speaks, and all of the risk should be taken by someone else. That makes you a coward. Speak up before you lose the ability to speak.
Very well said. Very well said. Uh, uh, your upcoming visit here to Iceland has already sparked some strong reactions, and I have to admit, I was quite taken aback when I read an article by an Icelandic journalist who described you as a controversial academic, because I've been following you for many years, and I was just like, what is he? I just didn't agree with that. But, and brace yourself, he said, the worst Zionist on the internet. And just for fun, I would like to go over some of the main points from that article with you and get your response to it.
Go for it.
Article said, verbatim, it says, one of the ideas for which Saad is best known and which figures like Elon Musk have adopted is the notion that compassion for others is destroying the West. This concept, which he calls suicidal empathy or pathological altruism, suggests that society begins to decay and collapse when showing empathy and tolerance becomes more important than safeguarding one's own interests and ensuring survival. These ideas have started to exert direct influence in the United States through individuals like Elon Musk, who has the ear of the president, Donald Trump, for example, in the form of calls to dismantle U.S. foreign aid programs. Dr. Saad also has made headlines for a number of controversial remarks. He has, for instance, referred to the former U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris as a disgrace and a brainless communist. He has expressed contentious views on topics including women, transgender people, and Muslims. What do you say about these remarks from this Icelandic journalist who is welcoming you to Iceland?
Yes, what a welcome. Well, the suicidal empathy I've already spoken
Yes, you
about.
did, yeah.
Empathy is beautiful and it's a noble virtue when it is applied properly, right? So, for example, there is a Norwegian man who about 10 years ago was sodomized and raped by a Somali immigrant. After the Somali immigrant had served a short sentence, I don't know, 3, 4 years, which is not much for a rape, but he was going to be deported, the really, really empathetic and kind and compassionate victim of the sodomy felt very guilty that now he was going to not have a good life in Somalia. Well, I'm here to tell you and to tell all Icelandic people that our emotional system did not evolve to be empathetic toward our rapist. That's what I mean by suicidal empathy. So that journalist in question is void of a brain. Empathy is good, suicidal empathy is bad. That should be easy to understand for the average 3-day-old puppy. So that's number one. Number two, do I think that Kamala Harris is a lobotomized communist? Well, she has repeatedly said that we need to create a culture where we all end up at the same place, right? Therefore, equality of outcomes. Well, that is a central feature of communism. We will all be equally miserable while we wait in the long bread line. Right? As E.O. Wilson famously said, he was a biologist who studied social ants. When he was asked about how good communism is, he said, great idea, wrong species, meaning that ants are communistic, humans are not. So she is someone who has espoused communistic ideas. You just have to look up her speeches. And she is lobotomized in that she is unable to complete a single sentence that has any meaning. She's a complete imbecile. Now, that's a fact, right? If I were to administer to her an IQ test, I don't think she would score the way
I
Einstein does.
I agree.
Correct?
I agree.
So that's that. What was the other one he said? Oh, comments that he's made about women.
Yeah.
I'd like to see which comments he makes, because I'm willing to bet that Monday morning when I wake up, I have defended more women's rights on that Monday morning than this idiot will in his entire life. I defend the right of women to be free of sexual attacks in the Middle East. I defend the rights of women to not have to share showers with biological men. I defend the right of women to not lose medals to biological men. So I will put up my schedule as a defender of women against this idiot any day of the week. When it comes to Muslims, I have nothing but love for individuals, right? I know more Muslims and I'm friends with more Muslims than this journalist will ever meet in his entire useless life.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that Islam is compatible with Icelandic values, right? Iceland has certain values that it's proud of. Now, I would be happy to sit with him and debate whether the foundational values of Islam are compatible or antithetical to Icelandic values. Set it up. I'd be happy to debate him. So criticizing specific tenets of Islam is perfectly different than hating individual Muslims. I am very good friends with imams, right? Islamic, equivalent of priests. So certainly they wouldn't be friends with me if they thought, I was bigoted against individual Muslims. I attack ideas. I never attack individuals. So this idiot needs to go and find his brain, and then we can talk.
Yeah, that's the thing with the liberal media. I mean, you often get the feeling that they're willingly ignorant, and they somehow manage to misinterpret everything that their opponents say. So this was a perfect example of that. But what about the thing about Elon Musk, that you're having the influence, or you're influencing Elon Musk, which is then dismantling U.S. foreign aid program. So you were the ideologist behind that evil doings of Elon Musk in the current American administration.
Look, it always gives me great pride that I can have the ear of important and powerful people. So yes, guilty as charged. I have been hopefully able to offer Elon some ideas that he has taken and then shared with the president. That doesn't make me or him mean people. Aid is nice, but not suicidal aid, right? So for example, there is no reason why there should be whatever, I don't know what the thing is, a $75,000 grant to promote transgender theater in Peru, right? That's not what American taxpayers should pay. But that's precisely what suicidal empathy is, which is you're willing, in your desperate desire to appear infinitely dysregulated in your compassion, kindness, and empathy, all bets are off. There is no modulation of the reflex of empathy. Let me give you an example. If you see two children that are about to be hit by a bus, one child is your biological child, one child is not your biological child. If I were to ask you, most people around the world, including that idiotic journalist, who would he jump and save? Who would he jump and save? The biological child or the non-biological?
Of course.
The biological, right? Now, that's not because he is mean and he is callous and he doesn't believe in empathy. It's because life has created trade-offs, right? If we had infinite money, we'd give infinite money to everybody and sing John Lennon songs, but we don't. Economics involves trade-offs. Our emotional system involves trade-offs. Our responses involve trade-offs. Those are called homeostatic systems. So yes, I want to save every child on earth, but given that I can't, I will show preference to my biological children. So will every single parent in Iceland. You know what that's called? It's called evolution. So nobody is questioning the importance of compassion, kindness, and empathy. As a matter of fact, I'm an evolutionary psychologist, so I have forgotten more about those topics than this idiot will ever know, right? So nobody's questioning that, but it has to be within regulated norms. By the way, that's what a psychiatric disorder is, right? So take, for example, OCD, right? Obsessive compulsive disorder.
Yeah,
Yes?
yeah.
Well, obsessive compulsive disorder is a dysregulated mechanism of an otherwise evolutionarily beneficial process. Let me explain what that means. The idea that you should scan environmental threats makes perfect evolutionary sense, right? If you and I meet in Reykjavik and I notice that you sneezed into your hands before we met, and then you shook my hands, I will go quietly to the bathroom to wash my hands so that I don't catch your cold. Yes, that makes perfect evolutionary sense.
Sure.
But if I spend 8 hours a day washing my hands until my skin comes off and I'm stuck in an infinite OCD loop of germ contamination fear, it becomes dysregulated, right? What started off as a adaptive process, when it misfires, it becomes maladaptive. That's exactly my argument for empathy. Empathy is perfectly noble when it is directed in the right amount to the right people at the right context. When it becomes orgiastic and unregulated, it becomes suicidal.
Excellent. Well, okay, Dr. Gad Saad, it's been an absolute honor to have you here on my show, and I'm looking forward to seeing you and your lecture here in Iceland in June, here in Harpa, the conference hall. The tickets are already on sale, as we have already said, and I hope you will have a wonderful time here in Iceland. Are you planning on staying for? Are you gonna see something of Iceland, or how is that?
Thank
How's
you.
your plans?
Thank you for the good wishes. I mean, I originally I was planning on staying a week, but then I had to coordinate immediately after my Reykjavik event.
Oh,
The next day, I have to head off to a London speaking event and then to
oh,
another event at University of Buckingham, I think. And so I'm not staying as long as I would have liked to. Hopefully, I'll see a few things, and hopefully, you guys will invite me back for a round two.
we will definitely do that. Thank you so much, Dr. Gad Saad. Have a nice
Thank you,
day.
sir. That was fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.